Hi, everybody. Welcome to the case of the red herring. Many of you may have already looked up this term, but I wanted to share it with you because it's one of the central concepts in detective fiction and detective movies. I happened to find this wonderful illustration that is kind enough to define what a red herring is. And as you see, there's a literal definition of a kind, it's a fish, but it's also something, especially a clue that is or is intended to be misleading or distracting. And when we come to the death of an expert witness, we really find there are so many red herrings everywhere that it's like we went on a fishing expedition. And I want to look at that a little bit in this presentation. I'm going to freeze up my camera here, give you a big smile. There we go. And I want to talk about two different things. So we've talked about the definition of the term. It is a we know that it's something that shows up in the plot that's and we have to say either something was a person, or as I'm going to argue a little bit later, there's also all kinds of other things. There's also a whole host of motives. Um, the point is to keep us guessing. One of the reasons I've suggested that we like mysteries so much and that we're so interested in them and they're so compelling to us is because they allow us to connect and to manipulate something that we actually don't really like, which is uncertainty, a lack of knowledge. And as we confront it as we read them, as we read mystery novels, and yet we all, at least in traditional mystery novels, we reach some kind of a conclusion. There's some kind of closure. We confront uncertainty, and through the exercise of human intelligence and some dumb luck, we arrive at a resolution, some kind of resolution. Now, there are plenty of trends, particularly we're looking in the noir subgenre of detective fiction where the resolution is problematic or difficult, or sometimes even in some more modern novels, non-existent. But for the case of a book like Death of an Expert Witness, which is really a very classic cozy sort of style, where you have you have a set of suspects and all sorts of possible motives. We are looking for a resolution, and we do get a resolution. The attraction of the red herring is also that it's the idea that anybody could commit a murder. This is one of those. Now, something I've been harping on throughout the semester so far has been the idea that we have this attraction to the other. And one of the places where we really see the other is in ourselves, and the human potential to do things that we are generally ashamed of or horrified by, and yet we know that to some extent, we're all just, a couple of bad days away from knocking somebody off. Um, so, I'm fascinated by the idea of the red herring. We're going to see this again in St. Peter's Fair. We've already seen it in the in the works that we've read. Think about even as far back as the Edgar Allan Poe murders of the Rue Morgue. Excuse me, while I stumble a little bit more over that title. Even back to Poe, remember that there's a guy who's arrested. We don't really know why he was arrested, but we find that with we're sort of led astray and think, oh, maybe somebody broke in and did this. And then the other red herring that we see in there are all the different stories that the people tell in the police reports, and what comes out in the newspaper. That each person thinks it's a Russian or an Italian or a Chinese person, or all that kind of stuff. if you think about the Sherlock Holmes stories that we read, there was always, you always have a doubt that it might have been one person who did it, and one person is suspected, but then it turns out to be somebody completely different. And only the brilliance of Sherlock Holmes allows us to make our way. Now, by the time we get to the Thin Man, there's another story where there are a tremendous number of people who are at different times suspected, including, interestingly enough, the detective. If you recall, suspicion falls on him for a little while, although the reader, I don't think, is supposed to suspect him. In kind of an interesting case, in Farewell, My Lovely, we know, on the one hand, who one of the murderers is, and he's pretty tough to miss. But we don't know who commits the one murder that kind of gets the whole ball really rolling in terms of all the bad stuff that happens to Marlowe. And that becomes this central mystery that drives Marlowe from place to place. And the whole idea of Velma as a person separate from Mrs. Grail is kind of a red herring. You have this, you think that they're actually two completely different people. And so you're looking in one direction, and then when those two identities merge, you're like, oh, why didn't I see that all along? Or maybe you did figure that out, but for me, it was kind of a surprise. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the term and why is it attractive, and we sort of looked a little bit at, we've been seeing red herrings all along. However, there's some things going on in this story that make it a particularly rich fishing hole for us. If we look at, let's just look at and think about the cast of characters. Now, this isn't every single person. I have a list here. This isn't every single person who shows up in the story. I mean, there's millions of people, but these are people who work directly with Dr. Lorimer and who have direct reason to kill him. He's not in any way a likable man. I noted in my announcement that most of us are really glad when he shows up dead. I mean, it's like, yay, somebody killed him. But we have the Kerrisons. I really probably shouldn't mention William Kerrison because he was just a little guy and he really couldn't kill anybody. But we have Dr. Kerrison. We have Nell Kerrison, who she's only 16, but she's pretty nutty. We have Detective Inspector Doyle, who has a little, there's questions about him selling marijuana. There's Dr. Lorimer himself, who there's some question about the things that he does. We have Dr. Haworth, and then we have his half-sister, Dominica Schofield, and she is kind of, I had talked in Farewell, My Lovely about the femme fatale, and also in The Thin Man, about the concept of the femme fatale. Dominica Schofield is that femme fatale brought forward by, 15 years. But that's her again, this woman of tremendous power who has ownership of her sexuality and does things with it that are shocking and also are in some weird way kind of, I don't want to say admirable. Admirable is the wrong word, but she does have control, and if she doesn't want someone, then she says no. And it's really interesting how divisive and difficult that is. And it would be worth it's worth casting a little bit of a thought into why we have to make this woman who chooses who is sexually dominant. In other words, she chooses her partners, and when she's done, with them. She's done with them and lets them go. Why she also has to be involved in an incestuous relationship. Why do we have to put those two things together? And it's very interesting. It's like as if we can't really write about a woman like that unless we make her truly unnatural. It's just something I put that in there because what's fascinating is that we also have the polar opposite of Domenica Schofield. We have Brenda Pridmore, and I'm sorry I'm jumping down a little bit. We have Brenda Pridmore, who is a sweet young thing. She is what is known as an ingenue. She is like Anne Reardon in The Thin Man, except Anne Reardon has more on the ball, but she's still, Anne Reardon is pretty much for sure a virgin, and that's what Brenda Pridmore is, and she's, hovered about by protective parents, and, she's a good girl, and everybody makes sure they want to say that. And she does things like faint. Only good girls get to faint. So jumping back up on our list, we have Stella Mawson and Angela Foley, who are a lesbian couple. And it's very, it's interesting when Dalgleish breaks the news to Angela Foley. He says, "Your friend is dead." Doesn't say your lover, your beloved, but this is an openly gay couple, and they're living together, and there's the homosexuality is clearly disapproved of by Dr. Lorimer, who happened, by the way, to be married to Stella Mawson. Oops, anybody can make a mistake. But they didn't consummate their marriage, so they were able to have it annulled. Anyway, then we have the grotesque and kind of scary Miss Willard, who's the housekeeper, Mrs. Bidwell, who takes care of the lab, and then Claire Easterbrook, who's a scientist. And I think I left somebody off here. No, I did. I didn't mention Clifford Bradley, who's the scientist that Dr. Lorimer torments and is trying to get him fired. Okay, so what all these people have in common is that they gang up on us as readers, and we start to get confused. It's one of the very subtle red herrings of the whole book, is that you start to go, wait, who, what, when, where, how, why? And she does a great job of demanding of her reader that you keep all these people straight and what their stories are and what they're doing. And she further confuses us by starting out not with the crime, but with something before the crime, with a murder. We start, there is a term which is called en media res, which means beginning in the middle. And instead of we sort of do begin in the middle of things, but we don't. We begin in the middle of another story, which is kind of in many ways this site of all these little red herrings. We get Nell, who's crazy, and she's whacking her little doll of Dr. Lorimer, and we get Dr. Kerrison and all his worries and his broken marriage, and he's thinking about his wife who's run off with a doctor, and then and we have this hideous murder in the Clench Pit. Isn't that nice? And a intelligent person, we know it's a mystery novel, and here we are, we're looking for clues. We jump in there looking for clues, and James is such a master at giving us a wealth of them. We have too many, and I think it's one of the things I think that makes this book so brilliant and so difficult to follow. Now, we don't just have people who serve as red herrings. We also have this, what I call the cast of issues. I talked a little bit about incest. It's very, very, I don't even want to say it's hinted. James makes it clear without showing us, scenes of graphic sex, that Howarth and his sister are sexually involved on some level, and it's something that Domenica's husband perceived, and apparently it may have led him to kill himself or have a car accident or whatever it is that happened to him. But it's his obsession. He is obsessed with her, and she is, we're not sure what her story is. So we have incest. We have madness. We have Nell's madness. In some ways, we wonder if Dr. Lorimer is kind of crazy because he was always kind of an unpleasant oddball, and then after Domenica dumps him, he goes pretty nutty. We have obsession, Lorimer's obsession with Domenica, Howard's obsession with Domenica. All kinds of people have obsessions with all kinds of things in this story. We have greed. We have people who want money, who cheat others to get it. We have Doyle, who is selling things on the side, and people who are. We have Stella Mawson and Angela Foley, who are really hoping to get hold of money. Now, that is not portrayed really negatively, but it is thrown to us as a possible motive for murder. We have anger, all the anger that Lorimer arouses, that people feel so furious with him. We have prejudice, and I put it right next to homosexuality because it's interesting that we see that prejudice coming out, and we wonder, how it's almost as if that prejudice is a possible motive. I mean, it's something that's going, that's kind of floating around in the air. We have lust. The murder in the Clunch Pit is, a tryst gone bad. We have that encounter with the prostitute, and who spent time with Doyle. We have transgression, and by transgression I mean, Domenica is having sex in a church. Now, it's a church that's also used for performances and things like that, but it's still, it's also used at the church. We have, as I mentioned, violence of various types, infidelity, suicide, all these things, all these red herrings, motives, things we ask questions about that are motives. And what's really fascinating to me about all of this is we're in a sea of red herrings, but it's also worth thinking about. I don't know about where you were at when we went from Farewell, My Lovely, but I was describing Farewell, My Lovely as the world of it as being pretty dark. And you may have expected that, now we're going back to jolly old England and things are going to be good. But look again at this list of things that are very churning right on the surface of this story, and forget about it. It's not merry old England. It's pretty grim. James is really, with all these, with her cast of red herrings, is really showing us a grim, dark picture of human nature. There is a profound sadness and a pessimism that permeates this story. And it's really interesting to observe that and to think about that and to think about what we're learning culturally about the world that James is writing from. By the way, I invite you to read her biography because it's fascinating, and it will give you a sense of where she was coming from, coming out of World War II. But what's so interesting is that many of the trends that we saw in Farewell, My Lovely continue and continue to be played out in this completely different world, because we have time frames that we're moving from one time frame to another. And even though in many ways this is a much more traditional detective novel than Farewell, My Lovely. You know, and when I say I shouldn't say traditional because what I mean is a much more in the model of the earlier and later British writers who had a certain kind of, you know, what we would call a police procedural. Even though that's true, overspreading it is this profound sense of loss, of grief, of uncertainty, of the many ways that human beings, even those who mean well, can come to fail. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope that this, like all the other presentations,